You're on mute, Jeffrey.
That would kind of help, right? Uh, so we're going to talk about Excel automation. Excel's been around for a long time. I remember the first versions of UiPath, we had Excel kind of out of the box because it was kind of needed. If you guys continue on the trainings in the academy to the advanced, you're also going to see Excel being used there on the robotic enterprise framework. It is very widely used, not only in organizations, but also on automation itself. It's a very handy way of transferring data and moving them around. And of course, UiPath uses a very low code, no code approach to it, which I remember the days when I used to do Excel automation where we used VBA, which is a Visual Basic for Applications version that you can use inside of Excel and stuff like that. But it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of learning of that code if you don't already know it. Here we can do all that stuff in a much faster pace and a much easier way to implement it. So because I like to show and tell, we're going to do mostly demo from now on, but I wanted to clarify one thing. So I mentioned automation in Excel existed since the beginning. In the beginning, it was very much limited. It was very basic functions. We call it today the classic workbook activities. They still exist. They still have a purpose. But we have since revamped into the modern application integration activities. A couple of differences between the two. The classic does not require Excel to be in a computer to run, which makes it very convenient if you just have like a quick machine that you want to run an automation that needs to read an Excel or write to an Excel file, but you don't have Excel installed in there. Great. Classic activities are the ideal scenario for that. It also uses sort of a file approach to altering the Excel file rather than, again, using Excel to do the manipulation. It is much faster to use. The downside is it only has some very basic activities like read and write for the most part. With the modern activities, it does require Excel, and it also requires an add-in to be installed. We'll talk about that in a second. And it's basically doing it in a different approach. It's taking Excel, opening it up, and then telling Excel what to do for us in our Excel book. So it is a little slow for that, but the upside is that it has far more functionality to use. You can do pivot tables, charts, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to explore some of those in a second. It can also run in the background because one of the things that I mentioned about Classic Workbook is that it can run in the background. It's kind of hidden in a way from what else we're doing in our automation. With modern activities, because it's using Excel, by default, it opens Excel up on your desktop. If you're doing that in conjunction with some other automation, like extracting data from a UI or saving data to a UI, you might not want to have that Excel, back and forth between your applications. So you can hide it, but it doesn't make it any faster, any difference. It's just you hiding the window, so it doesn't interfere with the rest of your automation. So this is the major difference between the two. So now we're going to go ahead and actually do a show and tell. So here is some setup demos that we're going to have. The first thing that I want to talk about is what are the things you need to make sure you have in your project or in your computer to make sure that you automate to Excel. So obviously, as we mentioned, we need Excel installed if you're using the modern activity. You do not if you are using a classic one. If you're using the modern activities, you need this Excel add-in installed, which you can find if it is installed or not by going to your tools and UiPath extensions. You'll see all the extensions are installed or not. As you can see, Excel add-in is installed. The good news is also that if you have Excel on your computer, by default, the installation when you're installing UiPath will automatically enable it. However, it is customizable. So depending on who installed, when you install it, it might not be enabled. So it's good to know that and where to go find it. The other part is your Excel activities package. Now I've downgraded them all to be the version of the Academy certification that we're doing. So you can see sort of an apples to apples comparison to the activities and the functions and the features that they have. But they're all here. It's just one. Also, good news on this one is every project template, every library template comes already with Excel, as well as Mail, which Mason we'll talk about in a few minutes, installed because they're pretty common. Very, very, very much in every project. So with that said, the other setting that you want to look at or can change is your Excel modern activities in your project. This is your project settings where all your project settings will override UiPath's or UI Studio's automation. One of them is your Excel design experience, which by default is set up to global, which kind of makes modern your default experiences, but also exposes the classic out. If you want to limit it to just classic or just modern, you can change it here. But you also can change other behaviors. We'll talk about Excel scopes and Excel files. These are all modern Excel settings that you can see. We're not going to go into detail. You can obviously look at more documentation on that, but that's where you will go to find it. So let's get started here. So I created a parallel activity just so I can show you a side-by-side comparison between things, and we'll evolve as we go to the demo. But basically what I want to do here right now is just read an Excel file. Now, I've created here a few templates, and I just want to show you the one we're going to use now. So I have these two sample product data, which one is in CSV, one is in Excel. We'll go into CSV in the next part. But this is a very simple data. It has a product ID, product description, order amount, and then the price per each unit. It has about 50 rows of data with one header, so 51 total. So we're going to use this. Now, first thing is, and I like to go through where to find these things. Everybody knows that the plus sign here will let you search for things. But when you don't know what exactly is available to you, I like to kind of go and poke around at the library or the activities library to see what there is. So for Classic, you're actually going to find it under System, File, and then Workbook. And kind of like how I alluded earlier, the difference between the classic activities and the modern activities is it's actually using the file to make manipulations, to read, and doing all that stuff. So sometimes it might be illogical that it's under System File, but that's probably the logic that was used to categorize it at that point. As you can see, you have a lot of reads here. If you want to just get a single cell, if you want to get the formula, as we work with Excel, we know the formula sometimes is one thing versus the result of that formula. So you might want to get those column, rows, ranges, etc., as well as rights and appends. There is one get table range, which would already kind of determine that we have a table in existence in Excel, which sometimes is the case, but it does not have a set table. We'll talk about that in the modern activities. So what I'm going to use here is a very simple reads workbook. Because I have it in my project, I'm just going to open the folder, identify the file, and then we're going to identify the sheet. Now, this might be a little tricky in your projects depending on how the sheet name is created. The default in Excel is sheet 1, but sometimes if you're getting a file from a vendor or a client, etc., they might have their own convention. They might have named it, and sometimes they may name it differently. Sometimes there's a date in there. You might have some logic, and you have the ability to create a variable where you define that logic beforehand, and then you pass a variable into here instead of a straight string. But that's very common in pretty much every other activity out there. Now, the second part is the range. Now, the range, by default, the read range will assume the last column used in the Excel file and the last row. So kind of like read if you want to read the whole column. But if you want to read certain sections, you obviously would just come here, and I'm going to open the expression editor, and you would put an Excel like, let's just say I just want to do this, right? This is pretty much what you would do in Excel. It's the same thing in here. You would put it as a string, and it would read just that section. Here on the properties panel, you have a few more options. Obviously, headers, it's very default, but I do over time encounter some sheets sometimes that, again, a vendor sends or a client sends that doesn't have headers, just has the columns. You already know what they are. You might want to check that, or you're going to eliminate a row. You might have a password, and so on and so forth. Now, the important one here for us is really to get the output of this. And if you haven't yet learned about data tables is just an object that's universal in most of the UiPath and .NET in general. It's a way to transfer data into a table. It's very Excel-ish, if that was even a word, way of organizing your columns and your rows into an object that you can create a variable. So I'm going to use here the Control K to set my play data table here real quick. Oh, I already have it. Sorry. When you do live demos, you forget to delete your passwords, your variables. So I'm going to go here and do a log message, and I'm going to access here my data table real quick. And all I want to do is just get a row count. We're gonna do here a breakpoint, and then we're going to explore this data table a little bit more. So let's run this here real quick. Here we are on our break table. So here's our data table, or my data table as I call it, as initialized by our read range from our Excel. If I click the little edit button, obviously you can see here the contents. It loaded everything, our headers, our data. And you obviously have things like columns. You can see the columns that you have individually in their names. And you have the rows and so on and so forth. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all these options because there's going to be more, but we will be talking more about data tables and I believe in part 3. But here's our data tables. We can see that we have 50 rows and we see all the data in there. And that's essentially a simple read using the classic activities. Now, and the Excel classic activity side, we now have, which is part actually of the modern activity, the CSV automation. Very, very similarly, they just exist in a different section of our library. It's an app integration. Like I said, it's part of our new modern Excel activities. CSV being simple files that just, as normally called flat files, all you have is read, write, and append. Again, not much different than classic activities, except that classic activities get to the granular, like if you want to read a column, a row, or a cell, or so on and so forth. Here, we don't even have that. But again, most of these are just data that we need to use, whether it be to dispatch a queue item, to process, or to do some other processing in our workbook. The activity here obviously is called CSV, not much different from our regular read range, except that there's no range because, again, CSV is a file in its entirety is read when it comes down. Now, some CSV, and CSV stands for comma separated values, are expected to be by default comma. However, sometimes comma delimited files come in tabs or delimited by semicolons. So you have the option here to change based on how they provided you this file. But other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. There's nothing really major differently between CSV and Read Classic. However, one thing that I wanted to point out is if you want to think about this way, is if you just have here 2 tracks, and one is reading the same files, well, essentially the same data, and you're going to create 2 data tables. What are going to be the difference between them? None, really. A data table, as long as you have the same
I believe we got disconnected.
Yeah, mute. You're back, Jeffrey.
Can you guys hear me?
Now we can.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry, it seems like my VPN had a little hiccup. All right, so let's talk about modern Excel activities now. There is a slight difference between how you use classics and how simplistic it is. You just drop and drag your activity here versus Excel. Like we said before, one uses the file, the other one actually uses Excel. So we have, for that purpose, an Excel scope. It basically just says, "Hey, Mr. Excel, I want to talk to you. I want to do stuff with you. Get ready." And through here, you can manipulate different files, and we're going to go into that in a second. But I wanted to point out here the options. The bunch of different options, from displaying alerts to what processor runs, macro settings in case you do have a macro enabled file. But the one we talked about earlier, which is show Excel window true or false, which by default is true, and we're going to leave it as true for our demo purposes. But the point is, you do have the option here if you do want to hide it for whatever reason. But this sets out the stage for your Excel from this point on. The second part you need to use is your use file. This is what tells Excel, or the modern activity scope, what file that we're going to be talking about. Now, before I even open a file here, I wanted to point out something that sometimes it might not be obvious, is you can be using in the same scope multiple files. You just need to drag more and more use Excel file activities. In this case, we're only going to use one, but that's obviously an advantage of not having to set up everything in from scratch. Of course, this kind of expects you to be using them all at the same point in your automation. If you're using at different points, this is kind of a mute point. So I'm going to open here my Excel sheet, and again, not much different. I'm going to now use this one here to get my read range, and of course it's going to see that I'm inside of a modern activity Excel scope, so it's automatically going to put that one up first. So again, slightly different, but one thing that I think makes this modern activities great is the fact that it can look at the file, see that the file exists, and it automatically tells me that, hey, you have a sheet 1 in there. So do you want to use this, in your range? And I can click on it and immediately pre-fills all the things that I got to do. I can also go and click Indicate in Excel, which will make it open Excel for me if I want to just select a certain portion of it. Instead of having to type the range myself, I can have it or just indicate it with my mouse, and it can do the same thing. So it's very visual, very low code. And of course, we have the customer input that allows you to define a table, pivot table, a range, or a sheet in itself here as well, as you normally would here on that pane or through a variable. Again, not a lot more options here are needed. We do need here is to create a my data table that doesn't exist in the scope, luckily. And that's essentially the same thing as we have on the other one. So again, the only difference here is the need for the scope to basically set up Excel for us to communicate with us. And then the second part is creating our use Excel file so we can determine what file it is. Now, one thing I want to point out is on this functionality here of Excel, the sheets and the indication, if this file does not exist, it will not be able to see that information to provide it to you. However, it allows you to create a template. You can use any other file, and I'm going to use the same file because obviously it's the same thing. But if you use a template file, one that already exists that has the data, will also help you pre-fill this. If this is a new file that does not exist, this simply would only have an indicate in Excel in the customer input. It will not have the list of sheets. Also, conversely, if this had multiple sheets, all sheets will be listed here, rather be from the file or from the template itself. So just wanted to point that out real quick. Now we're going to move into the third part. And on the third part, what I want to do is I want to do some data table manipulation. So you already defined here how we open this up in Classic. I want to just open them up here for 1 second. There we go. There we go. All right. We don't need this now. Hide these panes here so we can see this better. So here's the 3 tracks. So we already know this. We're actually going to use the classic automation variable to use through this because there's no need on using 3 at the same time. But it's the same exact automation that we built before. What we are going to be doing here is we're actually going to be adding a table. If you guys remember our sheet, it had a order amount and it had a price per unit, but it didn't have a total for our order. So for this demo, we're going to basically add a column to the data table. And then we're going to iterate through each one of the rows to populate and to calculate a total into our sheet. Finally, when we're done with all this, we're going to save our file into a new file that we want to create. So right here, I'm going to add column. Before I go do that, let me go show you here on the list where to find data table activities. They're going to be under programming, since this is a programming functionality, under data tables, and you can see the add column, rows, build, filters, joins, merges. And another thing I wanted to bring up about data table is, like I said earlier, they're kind of like an Excel-ish kind of sheet, but they're also kind of a SQL table. If you come from the data world, you might want to think of it that way. It's just tables with data. It's basically what it is. It's conjunctions of data, right? You think about it as an Excel file sheet, or you think about it as a SQL table. Is exactly the same thing. It's just data that you're going to manipulate to use. So we want to add here a column. So we do have here, and I actually want to bring this one here. I had 2 log messages that I left here already. One is giving me the row count, which is kind of just to confirm that we have the right amount. The other one I want to give is a column count, because it should give me a 4 here before I add the column. And here you should see the 5, and I just wanted to kind of show you this as we go through our code. Now, how do we add it? Well, first we're going to need a name. We're going to need a name for this column. We're going to call them total. What data table, if I have more than one, do I want to add this column to? And that's essentially it. Now, I do want to bring this one back because here on the columns, I do have a few other options. And one of them is telling what type this is, right? Is this a number? Is this a bunch of letters? Is this a true or false value? What it is? We're actually going to leave it as string. I could have left it as object, kind of potato. But you do have, if all the values are the same, you also have a default value. You have the ability to determine if this is going to be empty or not, and so on and so forth, or unique, because sometimes you do want to make sure that the same value doesn't get put there twice. In this case, it's not the case at all. Now the next one is called for each. There's a lot of for eaches in UiPath, by the way. So whenever you're looking to iterate through anything, start looking for eaches, because you're probably going to find where you're looking for. Just a little tip there on that side. So what we want here is a for each data table, right? The name says it all. We're going to put in our data table sample there, and it's going to tell me that the name is going to be called current row. It's what it defaults to. I can call it anything I want. I'm actually going to call it my order item. So that's how I'm going to reference it through the process. So if I want to start here with a log, again, I want to log something. I'm going to log my order item. And to access its items, we're going to use item and give it a name or the number order of the column. In this case, I'm going to use the name. I'm going to say I want the product, this product description. And because the item is an object for all the purposes, I need to convert it into a string, so it doesn't yell at me. The second part I'm going to do is I'm going to assign our value to our total. We want to calculate our total, so we need to do an assign. And the part that I want to mention here is earlier we said here that in order to define or to access the value of product description, we needed to convert it to a string. When you're assigning it, you do not need to do that because it's going to take that that as an object, right? So whatever value type you give it is gonna take it. So we're just gonna put order item total, and now we're going to calculate. Now, what are we calculating? Let me go ahead and bring in our Excel sheet once again, just so we can kind of visualize this. So what we want is this order number, which is an integer, a whole number, multiplied by the price per unit, right? So let's start by accessing our order number. So once again, we're going to go to our order item, amount, I believe it's what we call it, to string. The problem is, of course, we cannot multiply strings, so I'm going to convert this to an integer. And then I'm going to multiply it by our order item, and is our price per unit, and again to string. Once again, we're going to have to convert this one because it cannot multiply strings, and I'm just going to convert it to a double. And this is it. So I'm taking the order amount, converting it to a number to make sure that it can multiply, and converting the price per unit to a double to multiply. Now, I could technically take this and convert it into a string so I could format it in the way I want. I don't. I just want to leave it raw so we can kind of see what it does, because that's kind of the beauty of it, right? So let's run our automation here. And of course, it is yelling at me, but this time it's actually me. I left the file open. It does not like when the file is already open. Spoiler alert. So here we are. Bring it out a little. And here's our first breakpoint. So here's our classic order. Just visualizing that it is the same sheet, that it has the same values and the same rows. That's great. I'm going to put a breakpoint here so we can stop before everything else. I'm going to go continue. And if you see here on the output panel, you see that before we added the column, It only had 4 columns. Now it does have 5. Very good. It did what he liked. So what does our data table look like? Oh, look, there's a new total column here. And there's a comment, even though there's no values in front of that column, the column is there. It's just that it's blank. So now we're going to start iterating. We're going to calculate the first one. As we can see, there is absolutely nothing on that data table. Let's do one iteration and open it. And voila, here's our first number. It has already calculated the amount. I'm sure if you grab your trusty calculator, you'll see that 13 times 1865.64 will add up to this. So I am going to take the breakpoints and I'm going to let it do its job. And unfortunately, I did not pause it to show the other part. However, what it did after it completed all the totals was it saved this using a classic activity to write this range to a new report. Well, let's see if our new report is in our folder as it should be. Oh, what is this? Let's open it up. Here we go. Here's our new sheet. Looks not very pretty, but it's here. And it has a total column with every single one having a value. So that means that it converted everything. Everything is fine. You do see these ugly little, excess of decimal points in some of them because of how the variables, multiplied into these infinitive loops. This is where formatting could help us kind of make it, into decimal points. The other thing too is you see these little green buttons here. If you're familiar with Excel, you know this means that this is text. So it's actually doing what I told them to do when I created the column total. I said I want this to be a string or a text. Obviously, kind of not the best, just an illustration of how those settings work for us on our process. Very low code, but still, this is the programmatic way of doing things when you're using classic activities and you don't have access to the activities in modern Excel. How would you do this, what we just did in Excel? Well, first and foremost, we would need our scope. We would need our Excel, use. We're actually going to save it to a new file with a different name, which is fine. But there's also an insert column. So very, very one-to-one in terms of how data tables work versus Excel itself. And this is why I said earlier that it is very Excel-ish in a sense. But it is much more powerful. Look, I can even tell where I want this column total to go. I actually just happened to put it in the same place that it originally was, but I have the option to say I want it before this or after this column. And I continue to have the option to set it to a specific format, right as Excel would do it here on this column. Doing the iteration just the same way. In this case, I even left the current row name defaulted. Not much difference. I am using here is the right to cell rather than the assignment that we had before. Notice here is that in a data table, you use the dot item to access the order amount. Here, you use by field. It is just the way Excel does it. Again, everything else is the same. Also much easier is because it knows what value format the order number is in our Excel sheet. So it knows it's a number. I don't need to convert it. Arguably, if it was a string, like if you guys remember our total was a string, I might have to convert it. In this case, I do not because Excel does recognize these both as numbers. So I just simply call it by the field and multiply it the same way. Not much different, and we're going to see this actually work. What I actually want to do here is I want to split my screen here a little bit. I don't have Excel, but I'm going to use this one here to set it up here on my stage. Oops. Okay. So that way we can see it. I'm going to hide this, and we're going to start running this here on our computer. Okay, don't need to be this big. Oh, here it is. Okay, all right. So it created our sheet. As you can see, there's not yet a total column, and it just created it. and it's going to start filling in the values as it calculates through it all. I'm going to take the breakpoint because we will be here for quite a little bit longer, and we can see it populating everything else. This is also the beauty of this, is that you can see things when you're developing as you go along. Even if later for production you want to hide this Excel file during development, you have the ability to see the steps as it's doing. The final step here is to read this range, and we're going to stop right there just so we can see our data table now finalized and closed, right? So here's our new sheet, has the column total and all the values that we just assigned. So far so good. We have done sort of the same thing on a side-by-side comparison. What I created here was a final demo, which is also going to be done on a split window for a second. But I'll just actually open it before we run it to kind of explain what it does. So it's going to do a little bit of different things. This is just basically set up. We're going to talk about the activities that it uses it. Some of them is going to be new. Some of them is going to be existing. But it starts with reading two files. So this is going to add a little bit of complexity to it. There are CSV files. It is still going to be adding a column to it. It is going to be filling in that total column in. But then it's going to join those two tables. And in this case, we actually can show you what the tables are. They are just simply an order data, which kind of shows a little bit of what that is. It's just that it has a customer ID on it. And then the customer data, sorry, I should probably bring this up because this is a CSV file, so it kind of shows here in data. So you see the customer ID here in a makeup customer ID to this file. And then on the customer data shows all the customers with makeup names and addresses and all kinds of different places in the US. So what we need to do is we need to create an invoice table, right? And we're going to take the data both from the orders, complement it with the customer information because we need their address there. We're going to identify them by the customer ID so we can create our invoices data. Then we're going to pause there just to see what it looks like. And now we're going to save this to our report. And in our report, we're going to create a sheet. We're going to write that data table that we just created from the invoices. We're also going to insert a column. In this case, it's going to be a product ID. We're actually going to use that package that I did to create a fake product ID there. I'm sorry, it's not a product ID. It's an invoice ID that we're gonna be creating, and then we're going to be pre-filling that. And finally, we're going to do something that in the Academy, it's actually done through automating the UI. But I wanted to show you that Excel does have that activity, and in this version already did. It's probably just to contrast anything can be done through the UI, even the things that we already have activities for. But the use cases might vary in how you have it. So you'll see us create the table here and using just a simple activity rather than even touching Excel's UI. Then we're going to create, delete a duplicate table, write the information for the customer ID to rename the header, and rename a sheet, and finally create a pivot table and insert a chart into our Excel sheet. So now let's see all this working in together. Yeah. So here we have our customer orders, as we saw earlier with the customer IDs, and we have our customer data side by side. We're now going to add the column, and we join them together to create our invoices data table, which is basically both of them together. And because we have customer ID in two places, you'll see a customer ID _1 here because this is coming from the customer data. This is coming from the order. We'll deal with that afterwards in the Excel in a second. Now we're going to open our Excel, and I'm going to move it here to the side so you can kind of see it doing its thing. So again, it has a sheet 1 here, blank Excel file created. We're going to insert a column, and we inserted so we inserted a sheet, and we inserted the column for the invoices ID. And as you can see here, I did it before product ID, and that's why earlier I was looking at the wrong side and was confused with what we were creating here. And now we're just going to start populating there a made-up invoice ID to all of our invoices. Now comes the time to create and format this as a table. Voila. Very simple. You can see now that we still have our 2 column IDs, so now it's going to delete one of them. I chose to delete this one since it made more sense customer ID to be there where the customer is on the other side. So you'll see there it goes. Now I'm going to change the header there for the customer ID to just be customer ID. Now, we still left this one here, which if we didn't need it, we would just delete it, but we did, or we would have renamed it originally. But we're actually going to use it for our pivot table. So we're going to go ahead and create our pivot table, which is not created yet. It's going to create it in the next step. There we go. All right, sorry. I try to intervene. Now, interesting enough with the pivot table is you actually can define the fields of the pivot here. Like I've used the state as the definition for the rows, and then I wanted to sum up their orders per state. So now I'm going to insert a chart, which it keeps wanting to go back to the invoices, and here it is. Very similar to what is on the Academy, was done a little bit differently, all using modern activities. With that said, that concludes our UiPath Excel automation. I just wanted to point out here that obviously we didn't cover all the activities. If you go here to the Excel, there's plenty other activities that you can use to automate, up to and including exporting this file to CSV, invoking Visual Basic. So if you have some Visual Basic scripting that you want to use to create this, you can protect sheets, unprotect sheets if they come protected, those kind of things. Again, very a plethora of activities compared to our classic ones. It's available to us.
Hey, Jeffrey, you did get one question. It's how many rows can UiPath extract from Excel?
As many as Excel has. If it's a format of XLS, which is the 9597, it is limited to 65 and change. I forget the exact number. I think it's 65,500 and something. And the modern Excel, so the XLSX files, can go up to over 1 million per sheet. So it will extract whatever data is in there in its totality.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And stop sharing. I did stop sharing. Okay. Oh, I am sharing my screen. So, Mason, are you there?
I sure am.
Alrighty.
Ready for my section?
Yes, sir.
Give me just a second to pull up the PowerPoint. There we go. All right, so my name is Mason. I'm going to be talking about email automation in UiPath. There's a lot of different flavors of email automation. So I'm going to start with the email activities. So you can find these by searching uipath.mail.activities in the NuGet package manager. These are going to contain activities for Outlook. It's not going to contain Gmail and O365 anymore. Those are going to be in the integration service packages. And then SMTP, so kind of your desktop types of your traditional desktop types of connections. You're going to find those in the email activities. And then in your integration service connections, you're going to find your Gmail, Outlook connections, as well as the G Suite and O365 scopes. You can find those there. There's different packages that you'll have to install for each of these. But these are the main ways that you're going to be able to connect to email. Some of them are a little bit more outdated, some of them are a little bit more modern, but it really just depends on the setup that you have, which one you're going to use. So for your Outlook activities, these are activities that integrate directly with Outlook on your machine. They're going to use UiPath.mail.activities. Outlook has to be installed on your machine. These are typically very reliable as long as they work with Outlook. I mean, you test them out, make sure that they work. They'll continue to work. There's not really any hiccups in the process. Your activities are going to cover all of your use cases with Outlook. This is going to be limited to single email only, so it's going to be whatever email account is signed in on your Outlook. And it's only going to be useful in Windows Legacy compatibility formats. So if you choose a Windows project, you can use this. If you choose a cross-platform project, you're not going to be able to use this. And then some of our integrations that aren't integration service, those are your G Suite, Gmail activities, and your O365 scopes. These ones come in as scopes in UiPath, and you can find them under UiPath.G Suite. If you type that in, you'll find that one. And then for O365, it's UiPath.Microsoft Office 365. These connect directly to API services. This is usable when integration service is not an option. So if you're using like an on-prem installation, then you could use these with an account that's on O365 or in G Suite. You can sometimes, so I've used the G Suite activities in production. Sometimes you experience some authentication issues with those providers, and so you have to do some custom configuration on your Gmail account. Some of that's not recommended by Google anymore, so it's a little bit outdated, but you can still do it. And again, these are going to be for Windows and Windows Legacy only. These ones are not on your cross-platform and Studio Web types of authentication. And then lastly, or not lastly, but last in the kind of traditional sense, we have SMTP, POP3, and IMAP. So these require just UiPath.mail.activities. This can be used when your company has a mail server available. Sometimes you'll have authentication for an SMTP or POP3 server. These can also be used with Gmail. It's a little bit more difficult to set up. I can walk through some of the steps today, but a lot of times it's not super reliable to set those up. And Google actually recommends that you don't do that. SMTP on a company server can sometimes be a little bit unsecure because it can mimic any email account to send from. Ran into that a couple of times. So you just got to be careful when you're requesting that from your departments. These are all backend integrations to mail servers, and if you have an IT team at your company who owns that mail server, they can generally help you configure these. Again, these ones are going to be Windows and Windows Legacy only. And then the last one, which is kind of the UiPath preferred method these days, is integration service. So it's your preferred method for connecting to email. It directly accesses email accounts through the APIs, and it uses your account sign-on for that authentication. You can use multiple accounts and configure processes for different accounts, and we'll go through what that looks like. And this works with Windows, cross-platform, and Studio Web, so it's available across the platform. All right, without further ado, I am going to go into it and kind of show you some of these activities. So let's start with the Outlook activities, where you can find those and what they do. I actually don't have Outlook installed on my machine, so I'm not going to debug these activities, but I will just show you generally what they look like, where they are. So for your Outlook activities, you are going to find those under, now let's remember, you've got to install UiPath.mail.activities. I've got version 2.10 here. So you've got to install that, and you'll find them here under integrations. And then, oh, sorry, not integrations. App integration, mail, Outlook desktop. So these are your desktop Outlook activities. So you can get Outlook desktop mail messages, you can mark them read and unread, you can move them around. Um, and this is what they generally look like when you pull them in. So they're going to have a lot of their options over here in the preferences, and then some specific configuration settings per activity here on the activity card itself. You can give it an account, your mail folder, you can filter, right? All of that for getting, and you can also send messages, right? So you can give it a list of 2 addresses, a subject, body, all of this, everything that would be in an email. And you can also insert attachments in here as well. These are going to be a string path to your attachment. And I'll show you what inserting attachments looks like when we go to the integration service ones. We'll use those activities to actually send and receive emails. But this is generally what the Outlook desktop looks like for integrating with that. Moving on from that, we have kind of the O365 and G Suite integrations. Those are actually going to be in integrations. And you have to, so it's weird how you get these ones. For anybody who knows integration service, this integrations category is normally under integration service. But if you pull in the Google Workspace and the Office 365 integration service activities, they won't pull these in directly, so you'll have to get those other packages. So the way that you can find those is Microsoft 365, and then again, if you type in UiPath.Microsoft Office 365 in your package manager, you'll find that. And then the other one is this Google Workspace, right? So these are going to pull in both the integration service and the G Suite activities. And the way that you use these ones are pretty simple. They're like scopes, like a use application in UI automation. So you have a use Gmail, and you can actually connect it to accounts this way. So you would add a new account, right? Default, press OK, and it'll take you to a sign-on, right? And you can use any of your accounts here to connect to email. This is my sample one that I use for all my UiPath demos. You're going to have to select access for Gmail. The same thing with O365. You'll just go through that context dialog for signing in there. You'll receive your verification code, and then you're connected. Now, once you're connected, you can use any of these activities here. So you can get emails by ID, you can mark them as read, move, you can save, send, and do a lot of different things. The one thing that you don't find on here, unfortunately, is like getting all emails. You just have this for each email. So if you're trying to list emails, you're going to have to use this activity for each email instead of like a get emails. That's just a little inconvenience, but it still works. So you'll have to loop through those ones. So that's what that looks like. That's with the Gmail scope, and I'll show you the Outlook scope as well. It looks very much the same. And the setup is the same. It just goes through Outlook contexts. And you still use these same activities underneath of that scope. So you can use move email, right? You can use reply to email. Those all fit underneath the scope. And you got to make sure that the scope is used on the top level to use those. All right, so that's our integrations there. Those are not integration service. Those are like your direct integrations. But they do use, you can choose optionally to use an integration. These are actually integration service accounts that are connected here. And you can also use client ID and secret to connect. Some of these are phased out on the Google end. I'm not sure if they still work on the O365 end, but sometimes you have some difficulties with Google where it'll still bring up your sign-in screen. So just look out for that when you're setting these up. All right. And then the kind of the back-end integrations with email are our SMTP, POP3, and IMAP. You'll find those in installed once you have the mail activities, app integration, mail, and then there's IMAP here, POP3, and SMTP. So these ones actually connect with your email account through an IMAP or POP3 server or an SMTP server. And basically, there's two here. IMAP and POP let you get emails, and then SMTP lets you send emails. So that's all you get. With IMAP, your configuration is through, you can do it two ways. You can use Orchestrator, add new connection. That's going to bring up an Orchestrator prompt, and you can set stuff. The other way is to use integration, or to turn integration service off, say false, and you can give it a server, a port, email, password, and secure password. Typically, you'd want to go with the secure password over password, and then you could connect to a credential in Orchestrator, different things like that. Otherwise, you can just use the integration service to connect, and it'll give you all of those options here. So server address, port, email, password. One little caveat is this password is not your account password. These are going to be like application credentials, and there are walkthroughs for that on the Academy. I'm not going to show those here because those are a little bit more involved and you have to change some things in your Gmail. So I'm just going to show you these activities but not actually use them here. But you can see they have similar options, a bunch of neat stuff here. When you're going to test those, turn the integration service stuff off and just go through and set up your stuff in here. And then the same thing for SMTP, right? Has the same kind of setup. The server is going to be a little bit different because you're connecting to an SMTP server. So for like IMAP on Gmail, the port is like 995, and then there's a imap.gmail.com server. For SMTP, it's going to be different. For POP3, it's also going to be different. But like I said, IMAP and POP3 are reading emails, and then SMTP is for sending emails, right? So that's kind of the use of those. All right, so the last thing, and the one that we're actually going to get into using, is integration service. So you'll find those, there's two ways to find those if you don't already have it installed. You're going to find those in available down here. When you don't have them installed, they will show up under Google for Gmail, and then they will show up under, I believe it's Microsoft for the O365. Let's see, integrations, Microsoft, Office 365. And then Google Workspace, Gmail. The cool thing about the Google Workspace is you just authenticate once and you get access to all of the services. And then for Microsoft Office 365, it's the same thing, right? You get Calendar, Excel Online, all of that stuff. So it's just that one sign-in for all of those services. But for this, we're really looking at Outlook, and then for Gmail, we're looking at Workspace, Gmail. So those are the activities that we're going to use. I'm going to walk through the Gmail ones. But the Outlook ones work very much the same. There's like, if there's one in Gmail, there's an equivalent in Outlook. So they're gonna go hand in hand. But what I want to do, and keep in mind, because these are integration service, these can also be used in Studio Web. So if you just want a lighter experience to get in here and play around with this stuff, you can go into Studio Web and use this. We're just using Studio Desktop here. So let's go ahead and send an email. All right, so I'm going to pull in the send email, right? We can use different connections here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new connection. So this is going to connect up to integration service. So you can see I already have my, this is my MVP account that's already connected in several folders here. But I'm going to add a new connection. I am going to press connect here, and I'm going to choose my demo account. Continue. It's already signed in, but you would have had to like do your Google sign in to use that. I'm gonna have to give it permissions, and then it'll tell you if your integration is loaded correctly. All right, and then there you go. That's your email is connected, and you can give it a to address, right? Let's send this to my other Gmail account. I'm going to give it this subject. Let's go ahead and make that a variable. All right, and I'm gonna set that value here. All right, you can give it a body. One of the cool things about the body is you have all of these different formatting, so you can go bold, italic, underline, strike through. Everything here is this. You can insert variables as well, so this is really cool. Say I have, let's go ahead and, sorry. This is like an HTML format. So if I'm going hello, and then I insert my variable, I'm going to create a new variable here. I'm going to put a variable called name. Ooh, a little bit of lag. Put my name as Mason. Insert my variable here, right? Hello, name. This is an email. All right, so that's going to show up with the variable value instead of, there's just saying name here. So you can inject different things in there. You can toggle inline code and everything. And what else is really cool is you can actually inject HTML directly into these so that you can develop your HTML outside of that. And what that looks like, if you go to your app integration, if you have your email, your UiPath.mail activities installed, you can create HTML content and then use this editor. So you can add different values, you can add pictures, hyperlinks, everything to format HTML, and it'll output that HTML, and then you can insert that here as a variable as well. If you don't want to use this editor, you see this editor has a lot more options for things like images and tables. This one's a little bit, this is just like drafting an email and then injecting variables into there. This is where you find your attachments. So I actually have an Excel attachment because we just did some Excel stuff. So I have this report.xlsx. So there's different ways to do this. You can do a variable here, or you can build a collection to add multiple attachments. Let's go ahead and look at that variable. So this is an IEnumerable of iResource, right? And what that means is it's a type of like local file. Well, iResource is actually it's a file that's stored either on a server somewhere, like in, say, a storage bucket, or it's stored locally. So there's an iLocal resource that's a local file, and then there's iResource, which can be any of those. And you'll find these in all over the integration service activities. So if you're using it with like Amazon AWS buckets, they'll pull in files as an iResource, and you can put those in here. So that's the way that those communicate with each other. But if we're going to put a file in an email, we're going to use the file activities. In those, let's see if I can find them. Yeah. Here we go. There's a specific one that we want here. It's file exists, I believe. No, it's not file exist. It's not get file info. So this get file info is the older one, I believe. Yeah, it is. Where is this activity? There it is, path exists. Yep. That's not it. Where is this file? Activity. I'm blanking on the name of this activity. I use this one all the time, but it's... Jeffrey, do you remember which one gets the iLocal resource? Off the top of your head? I really want to show that, but I haven't used it in a little bit, and it's always been hard to find. So there's always these file activities. These get your file infos, but those file infos can't be used here. You have to have an iLocal resource. I'm trying to remember where that activity is. It's not system file. Let's see. It might be under here. Yeah, it's not under here. So there's a specific activity, and I'm just not remembering what it's called to get your local resources. But that's how you would get an attachment. I'm not going to be able to find it today. Let's see. So that's how you would add attachments into your email. The other way to add attachments is through just using your iResource from if you have it stored up in like Google Workspace. Say you have a file stored in Google Drive, you could load that file into a local resource and attach that here using the attachments collection. But let's go ahead and just send this email. So I'm going to send this from my integration service account that we connected here, and I'm going to send this to just my personal Gmail, just using this send email activity. And so remember, we created this variable for name. We created the subject variable, and I filled those both in here. So this is our subject, testing email automation, and then the name here. We're going to send that. Oops. Sorry. There we go. All right, so that sent that email. And then I'm going to connect to my other account and actually read that email in a different activity here. So let's go ahead and not there. Add a new sequence, read email. All right, and to read email, we're going to use the same list of activities. Going into installed, integrations, Google, Workspace, Gmail, right? We can use for each email, we can use get emails, get email list. And this one's really cool. Using get email list, we're able to apply some filters. And these are actually context specific. So I can choose my BCC, has the words, categories, date, time, the subject. We're actually going to use the subject for this one. And we're going to use the contains field. And then I'm going to pull the value that we put into my subject here, right? And then you have all these options over here. So you can include your subfolders. So if it's in a subfolder under your inbox, you can click true here. And so different folders underneath of that folder will show up in this as well. You can filter it to only the unread ones, right? You could do with attachments only. So if it had an attachment on it, important only, start only, mark as read. So when you open it, you can mark it as read. That's very helpful for certain workflows that you're automating. Say in your automation process, the person uses, unread emails to know which ones to work. You can make your bot only work with the unread emails. You could do other things like move it to different folders and whatnot. So that's an option for you. We're going to go ahead and use this one. And so we're only really getting that one email that I sent, right? But by default, this activity gets a list of emails. So it's going to be getting emails. And then when you create this variable in the output here, so we're going to the properties output emails. I created the emails variable with that Control K shortcut, and that's going to show up in variables here. So that's a list of Gmail message. So that's what you'll see as the type here. Let's go ahead and inspect that. Oh, sorry, I clicked run. I didn't put a breakpoint here. I'm going to do this and put a little log message so that we have a nice place to breakpoint. So we're getting our email list. We should really only get that one email, but it's still going to come in as a list type. And it's going to match any email that matches that filter that we put in there. So we're going to step over that, and we're going to check our list here. So that's going to show up in our locals when we're debugging like this. And we can actually look at this object. So we can, oh, we got 0. Gosh darn it. Oh, it's because I didn't connect to the right email. Okay, so this is this is how we use multiple emails. So I sent, if we remember, in this one I sent this to my personal email account. I'm actually going to change that. Let's send this to my, because I already have a connection for this one. So we're going to send it to my MVP account. Bam. And then I'm going to connect to that guy and then read my emails. Might take a second for it to show up. Give me a second, I'm going to check my email real quick, make sure that it showed up. Now, again, got to read the, so that saved it as a draft. And that's a useful feature for like a human in the loop. So if I go and check my account, it's not actually in the sent, but I got 2 in the drafts here, right? So there's that option. Save as draft. If you set that to false, it actually sends the email. So, and this is how I develop. I always mess it up and then I test it and then it works. All right, there we go. I'm gonna wait for this to show up in my inbox real fast. There we go, it's in my sent. It's gonna take a second to show up in my inbox. Yeah, that's fine. Let's read a different email while that's waiting to show up. All right, so going to my Gmail, I'm just gonna look at one of these. So I've got a few emails in this one. So I've got a Google security alert. We could read that one, and it looks like we actually have multiple from Google, but none that have security alert. So let's go ahead and read that one, just to show what this looks like while we're waiting for that one to show up. So earlier I signed into my account from somewhere. It gave me a security alert. Maybe I want to read all those and do a UiPath automation. Maybe it sends me a text every time somebody signs into my thing, so I'm not just reading my email for it. I'm going to sign in specifically to that email account, and I'm going to get that email. Right? Step over. There we go. So now we have that generic list of Gmail messages. You can explore that by clicking this down arrow. You can get the raw view. So we've got 7 different ones here, right? And we can look inside of those objects. By default, this filters the newest is going to be your top one. So that's just the way that this is sorted. So if you need to get your newest one, you just take the 0 out of the array. So this is going to show all of the details of that. So you can see all of the different values that you get inside of this email object. You can see subject, body, there's a body as HTML, right? And a lot of different things here. If you're working with emails, let's see, where's it at? Message ID. So if you're working with emails in a lot of different automations, say you have different workflows that are accessing email, you have different automations that are doing the same thing, it can be helpful to pass this message ID around. So say you're working in an REF and your dispatcher reads a bunch of emails and you want to put those into your performer, you could add this message ID up into the queue item and then use that message ID to get the single emails out of the server rather than getting the list and trying to filter it out. So that's a very helpful field that's in there. Yeah, and then I mean everything else is just like what an email has. So if you have like your body, your subject, all of the different values of an email, you can also get your attachments. So you can download some attachments. The way that you work with attachments from when you get an email is with a different activity. Let's see, where's that one at? Download email attachments, right? So if you have attachments on that email, you use this download email attachments. And what's cool here is, so since we got an email list, right, that comes back as a custom object. We could use that, right? So our emails dot first, right? And we could put that into email message. So that's going to get the first one of that list. And that is what we actually input to get email attachments out of an email. And those will be saved into a Gmail attachment local item. So this is one of those iLocal resource types. So say you popped this attachment down, then you could send it in a different email on a different account entirely by inputting that into something. So that's how you get your email attachments out of an email, is using those activities. Let's explore that email list a little bit. So we have our emails. That's coming from our output here on the get email list. Let's log off our, I'm going to use, there's multiple ways to get the first email. So .first is a link statement. That's how you get the first email. Or you could say emails of 0, right? One thing to watch out for is if your result doesn't return any emails, then emails of 0 or emails.first is going to fail, right? So you'd want to wrap that in like a try catch, or you would want to say if emails.count is 0, right? Just to make sure that you're doing good exception handling, which comes in the next session. So I'm not going to get too much into that, but that's how you would make sure that you're safe here. But emails.0, so now we're in the actual like Gmail class, right? And so we can see all of those different fields that we had. We could display the message ID. Let's pull the body real quick, right? And we can log both of those off. Just give that a quick run. Boom. So now in my output, yeah, we've got our email ID here, right? Again, like I said, that one is a very useful field. And you know what? I'll actually show that one real quick. We've got time for it. And then there's our body. let's go ahead and show what we can do with that email ID. So now with the email ID, we can get a single email. Which, I mean, in this workflow, it's a little silly to get the emails by list and then get the single email. But imagine you only had your email ID if you wanted to get one single email. So I could go emails 0.message ID, right? And the email comes back here in this email output field. And that's how I would get a single email. There's no way to like filter down to a single email because if you think about it, your filters are going to possibly match multiple. So you're either going to use your get email list or get email by ID, and that's just those are your two like get email activities. Let's look at a little bit a few others in here, and like I said. Outlook's going to have some similar activities to this. So that's how we've sent and we've retrieved emails from our server, from our account. But there's like plenty of other stuff that we can do. We can forward emails. There's a for each email. So this one allows you to apply the same filter, right? And let's go through here and use this one real quick. So for each email, additional filters. I'm not going to put any filters on this one because I want to get a bunch of emails. And I'm going to just do a log message, right? So the way that this one works is it's going to go into your email account and iterate over your email messages. So for each email message that's in inbox, we limit it to the first 100. So that's over here in the properties. And then there's an output for the number of emails that you processed, which is handy. But once you go inside of this, there is a current email variable here. And that is what you're going to interact with to look at your emails. So I can log off my current email.subject, right? And so this is going to loop through all of the emails that match my filters. Right now I have no filters, so it's going to just match every email for the first 100 that's in that account, and it'll print off all my subjects. So we've got a bunch of security alerts, right? We've got my two-step verification when it was turned on, when I signed up for Postman, a bunch of different stuff in there. I signed up for Plex on this account too, so that's cool. So that goes through all of our emails. That's a very handy one. So if you're using an automation to take action on different emails, you could use this. You could also just use the get email list and then for each over that collection. It's really just like whatever flavor you prefer. This one's technically less activities, so it's a little bit more efficient. And also these are all available on Studio Web, so you can do this in a cross-platform bot or a serverless bot. So that's all cool. So that's for each email. Let's go ahead and say for each email that I have that security alert on, right? I'm tired of looking at those. So I want to archive them all. I can pull in my connection here. For each email, I'm going to archive each one. Current email. Go through here. And it'll move all of those to the archive folder. Right? Quick way to clean up your email, right? So that moves things in Gmail to your archive. In our Microsoft Office 365, right? We have the same thing, archive email. You can also delete those emails if you want. Oftentimes in a workflow, what I'll find is I'm using like archive or delete or move to a different folder. That's another one here. Let's look at that. Where's that one at? For this one, it's apply Gmail labels. So this is the big difference between Gmail and Outlook. Is Outlook uses folders, Gmail uses labels. So I can apply different labels to my email to organize them. So a lot of times I'll have a process that is reading email, executing on that email, but I don't want to like double work the email, right? So say I'm working all of the emails from a certain account. I will get those emails, take whatever action I want on them, and then at the end of my process, I'll archive it, delete it, mark it as read, or apply a label to it so that I know I processed it. And so I'm doing that with the email object that I get from either like for each email. If it's all in one automation, you're generally using like the for each email. If I'm using like a dispatcher performer from the RAF, I will generally use the get email by ID and load that from the queue. And then at the end of processing, if it's successful, I'll mark it unread or archive it when I'm done, and different things like that. So you see that activity here. You can mark it as read or unread. Um, Again, that's going to take the email object. We looked at the apply labels. So that's that's all of your like interacting with emails activities. One other thing that I want to call out is there are triggers from these. So you can actually trigger off automations based off of your emails. So if an email is received or an email is sent from that account, there's two triggers for that. And if you go into integration service on your UiPath tenant, there's a whole plethora of different trigger configuration settings that you can set up with a Gmail account. It's kind of tied in, so a lot of people can like tie their calendar in with their email. So if there's like events coming in from an email, you'd actually want to use these calendar activities. So triggers like calendar event created, calendar event received. So if you're trying to like make an automation that's on calendar events, just be aware that there's different activities for those that you don't want to use your emails for those. But yeah, you can trigger things off of like when you send an email or when you receive an email as well. So that's very handy whenever you want an automation to run every time there's a new email in an account. Typically, I run my automations like once every hour and then read all the emails, something like that. But you can run like one automation every time. That's an option available to you. Yeah, and I honestly that's about it for email automation. We took up most of the time there, so that's what email automation looks like, especially with integration service. And then you also have your like desktop and Windows Classic, Windows Legacy type of automation activities as well that you can use. And that's it from me.
Great job, you guys. Thank you, Jeffrey and Mason. I just want to open it up for anybody who might have any questions. We're getting towards the 11:30 mark, but we can take one or two questions if you guys have one. Great job. We have a lot of planned work using the email features, so this was awesome. Yeah, it was good. I'm not seeing any questions, so if you guys do have any questions, just make sure that you put them on forum. Remember to grab all the links in chat. I put everything there that you need. If you need to ask anything or call out to us. But other than that, you guys, thanks for joining today's session. And Jeffrey and Mason, thanks again. This is great. And we'll see you guys all on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Sure.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.